direction we want to go to, but it won't make a referendum until Monday. So basically, we're going to make
Anytime you are.
Will you grab John for us? He's out. He's out
He
in
just
the
needs to
lobby
come up here
taking
just for a
questions.
roll call real quick, and he can go back out.
Well, we decide on Friday. We're not going to get to vote on anything as far as referendum. You'll have to go. Well, it's not a,
Just a direction, vote of direction.
it's voted direction, so it's not a.
So you're essentially going to vote on the direction on Friday.
Yeah, but on Monday, the referendum's not going to be there, so the next board can vote on whatever direction they want to go anyways.
So why?
If it actually is a referendum, we just saw the thing from, yeah, we're going to start with you. He doesn't feel like it's necessary. But depending on what happens, because of the bond issues,
Well, then we'd have to.
then we'd have to. Yeah. So it may not be us at all, you're right.
Can't they just
But at least the intent of direction may be decided if they may want it, but it won't be confirmed.
Nothing will be done on Monday. So it's like, no.
Over here, man. Might be best if you see where they are or not.
I'll sit where I'm
Just go have her use her phone.
Yeah, someone moved it, and it wasn't me. Just to be clear.
Yes.
Michelle's not up here yet.
How long
Where
would
she
that
went?
take?
Oh, there she is. Yeah, we're ready. Yep.
That's correct. Okay. Sounds good. People who I had thought that were going to be up here.
Oh, thank you. Ah, sweet.
Yes, sir. All right, good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome you here tonight to the Fredonia Board of Trustees public hearing. This being the time and place for the public hearing to receive comments, questions on the water system evaluation report done by Labella and Associates. Proof of publication shown. And I call this hearing to order. We'll have a roll call of the trustees. Trustees Linden,
Here.
Trustee Byrd,
Here.
Trustee Esperson,
Here.
Trustee Syracuse,
Here.
and Trustee Twitchell.
Here.
The order of events tonight will be a presentation by Labella Engineers on the different options. There'll be a portion where we'll have written questions read and answered, and then there'll be a portion at the end for public comment. So without further ado, we'll have Labella give us our presentation, please.
Good evening.
Good
Thank
evening.
you. Thank you to the village board for inviting us to be here. Thank you to all of you for attending this evening. We are happy to be here to aid the village in making this important decision. So what we're hoping to do here right at the beginning is to give an abridged version an abridged version of the presentation we originally presented on November 13th at the previous village board meeting, primarily to shorten it a bit so that we can allow plenty of time for question and answer in the public hearing portion of things. So without further ado, we'll kick things off. I'm going to briefly introduce the scope of the evaluation that the village hired us to perform. I'm going to run through an overview of the 3 high-level alternatives that are on the table being considered by the village board at the moment. And then we're going to transition into a question and answer. So the scope of the evaluation is as it appears there. The scope was an engineering evaluation of the treatment plant, the reservoir and the dam and its spillway, and significant distribution system infrastructure, including the Webster Road tank and pump station and the Vineyard Drive pump station interconnection. Scope also included a hydrogeological evaluation of the nearby sites that have the possibility of being a future groundwater supply for the village, culminating in the production of a preliminary engineering report, a public version of which has been posted to the village website for public review. And finally, once the village selects an alternative and a method to proceed, giving input on optimally funding those improvements and decreasing the capital cost expenditure and the capital cost needs as much as possible to support the village's selection. So the basis of the evaluation is really grounded in regulatory standards. When we talk about, this needs upgrade or this needs replacement, it's not just Labella's opinion. It's based on what the regulatory documents require. So I've listed some here. I'm not going to linger on this slide, but it's just to point out that when we perform an evaluation, it's how do these components stack up when compared to the requirements within regulatory documents. Okay, so the three high-level alternatives. Alternative number one being considered is to upgrade the treatment plant, upgrade the reservoir and spillway. Alternative number two is to decommission the treatment plant, decommission the reservoir and spillway, and construct an interconnection with the city of Dunkirk to have the village distribution system receive flow that is purchased from the city of Dunkirk. The third alternative is to decommission the treatment plant, draw down the reservoir, and construct the interconnection. So there's a subtle difference between alternative 2 and alternative 3 that primarily involves what happens with the reservoir. So my colleague Don Lucas is going to touch on that in a moment. But before moving on from this slide, I want to touch on the portion of the scope that's related to the investigation of a possible future groundwater source. The groundwater source option could be combined with any of these alternatives. So if the village elected to proceed with field investigations related to finding a site that could provide suitable groundwater in suitable quantity that could be tied into the system, it could lessen the burden, lessen the supply needed either from the existing treatment plant and reservoir or from the interconnection with Dunkirk. So there's a possibility there for groundwater regardless of which high-level alternative the village selects. Now I'll pass it off to my colleague Don to discuss the reservoir and the spillway in more detail.
Good evening, everyone. Don Lucas. I'm a dams and hydropower engineer with Labella. I'm going to talk a little bit about the reservoir and the dam up there. So last year we did a more thorough engineering assessment of the reservoir and the dam that creates the reservoir. A few key items to understand is it is New York State considered a Class C high hazard dam. That does not have anything to do with the condition or the status of the dam and those structures. That has everything to do with the location of it, the amount of water that is impounded, and the proximity to residences and other established buildings and structures that if there was a failure would potentially be damaged by the flooding water. The current condition of the dam at the reservoir does not meet New York State requirements for dam safety. It is an older structure built before those requirements were in place, and New York State has very strict guidelines on what a dam must be capable of withstanding to be considered safe, especially when it is in this Class C high hazard category. We'll go into a little more detail on that. The report details it a little further, but that was the basis of our evaluation of the dam and the reservoir, which led to the subsequent discussions of what do you do there? Do you maintain the reservoir, which would require significant investment and construction at the dam to improve the spillway and come into compliance with New York State code, or do you move to decommission the dam? And there is a middle ground there with alternative 3, which is a drawdown. A little more detail on those alternatives, as I just touched on. Alternative 1 would be to upgrade the reservoir and the dam. The reservoir would largely be unchanged besides the construction at the dam and the spillway. That's a very significant construction effort But it would bring that dam into compliance with New York State and essentially minimize the liability that exists there with the condition of the dam today. Alternative 2 would look to decommission the dam, which would be a complete removal of that spillway. The reservoir would return to a more natural state, not so much a reservoir, but more of a river or creek bed type habitat. And alternative 3 is a drawdown. So that's kind of the happy medium that I discussed. You can, under New York State code, draw that reservoir impoundment down to a very specific engineered level where the existing structure would only require some more minor improvements and upgrades to be put back into a finding of sound with the New York State guidelines. And back to Matt.
So in conjunction with the work for the dam and the reservoir, each alternative includes work at the treatment plant, either to upgrade it or decommission it, and in the distribution system. So I'll briefly run through those now. So if the village were to select alternative 1, it would include upgrading the treatment plant. So this is a site plan sketch showing what that might look like. And the improvements to be implemented at the treatment plant would be very targeted. The existing structure would remain and be expanded to target specific improvements related to addressing current deficiencies when compared to regulatory standards. So there would be, and I'll try to show my mouse here, there would be a building expansion within this orange square here to add a third clarifier. There'd be a tank constructed here to provide flow for backwashes and fire flow in the event of a fire at the facility. There would be site work to expand the driveway, fence work to enclose the site and add an entryway, and significant slope stabilization work on this portion of the site where a very steep slope is near the existing building. So we'd have to stabilize that slope to make sure long-term the slope is stable and the building is stable up upon it. There'd be other improvements within the existing building. A major one would be improvements to the chemical feed and chemical storage facilities that would go along with what's shown here. So again, alternative 1 would include what Don was just describing related to upgrading the reservoir, maintaining it largely as is, and upgrading the spillway and dam, and then upgrading the treatment plant as generally outlined here. So the third piece of alternative 1 would be an additional finished water storage tank. So one issue with the current system is there's not enough finished water storage. So in the event that the village selected alternative 1, we envisioned a variety of alternatives, but came up with this design here, where a finished water storage tank would be constructed at a site that the village owns along Spoden Road currently, and site piping would be extended to serve that tank as an inlet and outlet to it. So siting the tank there would allow the village through this tank to serve some of the users at the high end, elevation-wise, of its system, and provide, meet all the demands, including fire flow demand in the event of a fire. So we have contemplated that tank at about 1.35 million gallons. And when this tank is constructed, it would eliminate the need for the current Webster Road pump station, which currently takes water from the Webster Road tank and pumps it up to those high elevation customers that would then be served instead by this new Spoden Road tank. Okay, so alternatives 2 and 3 both include the construction of an interconnection with the city of Dunkirk, so that via that interconnection, the city can provide flow to the village's distribution system, and the village would pay the city for that water. This interconnection would be designed to meet all village flows, so it would be designed to satisfy average day demand, peak demand, and assist with providing fire flow demand. So what we're showing here conceptually is an interconnection pump station adjacent to the existing city Willowbrook Avenue tank, and pumping from the same site as that tank into a central location in the village's existing distribution system, so that that pumped flow could feed directly into the center of the system and then extend throughout the distribution system network from there. So we would implement some complementary changes within the village distribution system to make sure no one's receiving over-pressurized flow, but generally, construction of a pump station here would draw from the tank and send it into the village's system, and so that would be the primary way that the village's system receives water. In conjunction with the construction of that interconnection, there's still the issue that the existing village system lacks sufficient finished water storage. So with this interconnection pump station, we would envision constructing about a 1.65 million gallon tank at the existing water treatment plant site. So for alternatives 2 and 3, the existing water treatment plant would be decommissioned, and so it would no longer be in use. And so since the village already owns that site and it already has a significant amount of piping that extends from the site to feed the system, it's a somewhat convenient place to build a tank that can then serve some of those higher elevation residents. So there'd be some site work involved, but what's shown here in this figure is a green hatched area that represents decommissioning of the treatment plant. We're showing it as about a 100-foot, 99-foot diameter finished water storage tank surrounded by a fence and site piping extended to that tank. So there would have to be some complementary changes made at the Webster Road pump station that would allow flow in the Webster Road tank to be boosted up to this tank, and then flow from this tank would flow by gravity to the system, including to those high elevation residents. Okay, so those are the 3 major alternatives. In addition to those alternatives, the questions of finished water storage, what to do with the treatment plant, what to do with the reservoir, and whether or not to construct an interconnection. The core of the village's distribution system will continue to be used regardless of the selected alternative. The pipes in the ground, the hydrants, the valves, that will all remain. And so this slide and the next slide just briefly highlight that going back 5 or 6 years, there are recommendations to line and or replace the oldest pipes within the distribution system. This is summarizing a report completed by O'Brien and Gear in 2017, now referred to as Ramble. But they were recommending the replacement of a significant amount of pipe or the lining of that pipe at an estimated cost of, escalated to about $7 or $8 million. And just to further note that, there's a significant amount of the pipe in the existing distribution system that is pre-1970, before modern cement lining was used on cast iron ductile iron piping. So the idea would be to target the lining and the replacement of some of those pre-1970 pipes to improve water quality in those areas, provide reliable water conveyance in those areas. And so we envision that the village would undertake this work in phases. It wouldn't be immediately, replace everything that's highlighted in bold here, but this is kind of an ongoing issue that regardless of whether the village selects alternative 1, 2, or 3, the water will be flowing through this network of pipes. So there's some lining and replacement that's been recommended as part of past work. So now for some notes about non-monetary considerations of the 3 alternatives. So alternative 1, pros associated with it, the village retains independent control of its public water system. PWS on the slide stands for public water system. Another pro is that with improvements and commitment to maintaining the system that the village would be making, there is a possibility that the village would be able to serve additional customers outside of the village in the future. Some cons associated with alternative one is that, the treatment plant site, as I mentioned and harped on the slope adjacent to the building, there are some significant site constraints there. It's not an overly large site, and there is a ravine very close to the building. So just due to the geography and the topography of the site, there are some inherent challenges with owning and operating and maintaining a critical facility there. And if the village were to maintain its own system, it would face, in contrast with the alternatives 2 and 3, where it would be receiving water from the city or purchasing water from the city, the cost would be high, and there'd be a significant regulatory burden. So operation costs, maintenance costs, short-lived asset costs, as well as the burden of having to adhere to all Department of Health, New York State requirements, would still be a burden that the village would have to carry. In comparison, alternative 2, some of that oversight, operation and maintenance, and administrative costs and the regulatory burden, as the village decommissions some of its facilities, including the treatment plant, reservoir, spillway, the overall burden would lessen, relative to alternative 1. So that's a pro. The village, in purchasing water from Dunkirk, the village would be paying for that pro, but that is certainly a pro associated with alternatives 2 and 3. In selecting alternative 2 or 3, the village would eliminate some uncertainty related to, maintaining that treatment plant site with its challenging site constraints over time. There'd be a more, brand new, definitively designed interconnection built on flat land adjacent to the Willowbrook Ave tank, so that'd be a much easier facility and brand new facility to operate and maintain and take care of. But on the flip side of alternatives 2, and some of these are shared with alternatives 3, the village would be giving up some of its independence, to control its own public water system. It would, in decommissioning the treatment plant, decommissioning the reservoir, obviously those facilities would no longer be available for village use in providing its residents with a safe, reliable source and supply of drinking water. So the village would be relying on and paying Dunkirk to fill that void. So they'd be giving up some independence if it selects alternative 2 or 3. Along with giving up some of that independence, there'd be the necessity to negotiate the costs and the rates of water with the city to reduce costs to village residents over time. And in the short and the long term, there's still high costs. The costs are not, the costs associated with upgrading and maintaining its own system do not necessarily go away just by selecting alternatives 2 and 3. We'll get to some cost numbers in the next slide. Just to finish with alternative 3, and to remind that the only difference between alternatives 2 and 3 is alternative 2 is decommissioning the dam and reservoir and spillway. Alternative 3 is drawing it down. So the chief advantage of drawing down is it eliminates some of the costs associated with decommissioning. It would be cheaper on a capital cost basis to just draw down the reservoir and stop using it rather than to go through the full decommissioning. So that's one big advantage of alternative 3 instead of 2. And there's a possibility that a body of water, there could be some creativity applied with how the village used that site going forward. So to touch on costs, there are not a lot of numbers on this slide, and I just want to briefly highlight a handful of them. What you're seeing, you see a description in column 1, alternative 1 in column 2, and then so forth, 2 and 3. I want to highlight the project cost row, and I'll try to do so with my mouse. Relative to one another, alternative 1 is estimated to be approximately $34 million project cost, alternative 2, $38 million, alternative 3, $26 million. So the fact that alternative 3 is the least expensive on a capital cost basis reflects in part that drawing down the reservoir is less expensive than fully decommissioning it. And then anticipating that the village would loan, again, this is a simplified analysis with some notes about our exclusions and assumptions on the right side. So this is excluding any grant funding. This assumes the village would have to loan for the full amount. It assumes that everything would be tackled at once, so there's no phasing. And the critical part of that assumption is that with phasing, the village could maximize its grant funding. So phasing will be really important regardless of what the village selects to proceed with. But to simplify this and just compare the three on, based on the exclusions and assumptions presented there, we project the simple average annual costs as shown there. So alternative one, about $1,245 annually per EDU. EDU stands for equivalent dwelling unit, which is a fancy word for household. So it's annual cost per household. And again, these numbers are very high because there's no phasing and there's no grant funding taken into account here. So that does not reflect the annual cost, but this is just seeking to compare the three on an apples to apples basis. So alternative one, $1,245 annually. Alternative two, $1,535 annually. And alternative three, $1,433 annually. To highlight one other very significant row in this table, I want to point to the second row closest to the bottom, the purchase water cost. This reflects the average amount annually the village would be paying to the city to supply flow to the village system. So in alternative one, that cost is zero because the village would be providing, upgrading the treatment plant, upgrading the reservoir, and filling its own system with its own water. In alternatives 2 and 3, over the 30 years, that would be almost $3 million a year. The current rate that we've been told by the city is $3.87 per 1,000 gallons. So that purchase water cost would start just south of $2 million in year one, and then assuming a 3% increase each year for 30 years, it would go up well beyond $3 million to culminate in just about in that average presented there. Just to highlight one quick thing, hence the redundancy with the slide here, the possible impact of finding a groundwater supply. The focus on groundwater is that oftentimes, if it can be located in an aquifer that could provide sufficient flow, it doesn't need, typically, it doesn't need as much treatment as surface water. So our team looked into some possible sites that could be sites for field investigation should the village choose to proceed in that direction. The village and the city and other regional partners have shared a lot of record documentation with us regarding past groundwater exploration that's been done and past studies that have been done. So we've taken all of that into account. This slide just serves to highlight that an example of a hypothetical scenario. If the village were to select alternative 3 or any of the alternatives, and it also wanted to proceed with completing field investigations such that it found a reliable groundwater supply that could, in this scenario, provide, let's say, 50% of the daily average demand into the village's system, there's a possibility for some real cost savings. And what's highlighted here is the scenario where, say the village selected alternative 3, but only had to purchase half of the daily demand from the city and was able to find a groundwater well that could supply the other half at a relatively low cost. It's a significant savings on an annual cost per household basis. So I want to stress again, as I did in the November 13th meeting, that no field investigations have been done. So you'll notice there is no column 4 here that outlines an alternative specific to providing groundwater to the system. And that's because we don't consider this a real alternative until field investigations are completed and prove that there's a viable groundwater source. Because as I mentioned, there have been studies done over time, and the village does not have a current groundwater supply. So all of this is hypothetical until proven otherwise in the field. One last note about it, though, is that is a potential way where the village could realize some of the pros associated with alternative 1 of retaining some independence over its own public water system, while also attaining some of the pros associated with alternative 3. So I won't keep going on about groundwater, but these are the reasons why it was included in the study. On this slide, before concluding, I just want to highlight some significant current unknowns. The first one is the possibility for phasing. Phasing is really critical because many times funding programs are limited by percent. So if you have $20 million worth of improvements and you do it all at once, the funding agency, for example, may say, we can provide you with a grant of 60% of the project cost up to a certain cap. And so if the cap is 5 million, then 5 million out of that initial 20 is the most that can be received. However, if the project is phased as two $10 million efforts, there is the possibility of receiving that grant for phase 1 and phase 2, thus doubling the grant funding and cutting the burden that the village must cover, from 15 million to 10 million. So phasing in coordination with the village and the Department of Health and other regulatory agencies will be really key in maximizing the amount of grant funding that's achieved by the village and minimizing the amount that taxpayers have to cover. I won't continue more about the groundwater supply. I've already spoken too much in all likelihood about it, but I've highlighted some unknowns here, chiefly that no field investigations have been done. Grant funding awards have not been submitted, so we will work as best we can, and we certainly recommend the village, and we know the village will put its best path forward to seek all the grant funding to lower capital costs as best it can. And finally, there are some question marks related to the distribution system. We do not have a functional water model that represents conditions that reflect current field conditions. So we anticipate that as the selected alternative moves from conceptual design here to the next phase of detailed design, the tank sizes and locations will be tailored according to system hydraulics to make sure that there's adequate pressure everywhere and not overpressure anywhere. Just to touch one more time on funding, this is a table that I showed at the November 13th village board meeting. The brief synopsis is that the dark green boxes highlight funding programs that are that we are most optimistic about for each alternative. Light green boxes, we're a little less optimistic about those ones. And then the yellow with the text in it highlights a few funding programs that could be great possibilities to reduce the cost to the village, but would require either that the village is able to meet certain eligibility requirements, or that the village complete an income survey to demonstrate that its service area meets certain eligibility requirements. So there are a significant number of programs, and we recommend that certainly that the village work through as many of them as possible to minimize the cost to taxpayers. So in closing, I want to say how appreciative we are of being able to be here with you tonight. We're very thankful to the board for inviting us to address you. I'm thankful to all of you for attending and listening, and we're looking forward to a great question and answer period. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'd like to thank you and your team, and thank you for everyone that showed up tonight. We really appreciate it. So thank you, Matt, and your team. We really appreciate it. Before we move on to the written questions and answer section, I just had one thought. I wanted to offer the board and the public a hybrid alternative, which would be a kind of a compromise between the options we have here. And the costs would already be noticed and realized in the projects. My hybrid alternative would be the option 1, to keep our water system and add an interconnect, which would be part of option 2 and 3. The interconnect cost in option 2 and 3, if you break it down, is in the ballpark of $10 million. So that would be kind of a compromise to those out there that, wish the board to keep our current water system. But if we had a redundant emergency supply, that would be optimum in situations where we've run into in the past, or if 20 years down the road, 10 years down the road, our reservoir is not operable or usable, that could be a source. But to have a redundant interconnect for emergency supply, I believe might be an option that I would like just to put out there. So it's not one of the ones that were proposed currently, but it was just a thought that would add $10 million to the first option, which ran 34.3 million, roughly 10 million more. So we'll move on right now to Mr. Dave Rowley, who will be our moderator with questions, and we'll go from there, and whomever they apply to, we will try to answer the best of our ability.
Also, I know we will have public comments at the end of the question and answer period, and I know John Esperson, he will be taking, there's a sign-up sheet for people that do want to speak, and we will follow that order. So if you would like to comment at the end of tonight's public hearing, see John. Right now, also, we have runners on each side of the Opera House, so if you have questions, you'd like to write a question for us to ask, just raise your hand and a runner will come and give you a 3x5 card. Our first question, considering the Fredonia Reservoir drawdown option, to what level is practical and advisable, and how effective would the reset level be in mitigating or substantially reducing threats to safety? So,
Great question. So the exact level that would be drawn down to was not calculated as part of this effort. That would be, if that alternative is selected, Labella would move forward with determining what that level of impoundment would be to render the dam safe for that water elevation. It would, I'll say, create an environment where if there was a flood level amount of precipitation, you've got a deeper basin there to catch that water and further protect the village from flood events due to precipitation. It's not likely that a drawdown would change the hazard classification. So the dam would remain a Class C high hazard, very likely, which again is just an indication of its location in proximity to residents and other establishments.
another question. The Labella report was very lengthy, 70 pages long. Since the report was submitted, what meetings have been held with Labella to get further explanation or clarifications? Has the village board met as a board to discuss the report, and has the planning board been asked to help the village? So,
To my knowledge, that would be no to those questions, unless somebody else knows of any other discussion that's been taking place with the entire board. We have not had a meeting, and I don't believe the planning board has advised us on this.
another question, the town of Pomfret is looking to expand water service to residents outside of the village. Will any of these options provide enough water to supply additional customers?
So the scope of the evaluation that we completed just considered how to supply existing customers. It did not consider how to supply any new customers in Pomfret or anywhere else. We solely focused on existing customers.
Okay. Why was the Fredonia Reservoir dredging not mentioned, need not mentioned in the study Also, how critical is that need, especially as it would affect water turbidity levels?
During our evaluation, we did not look at dredging the reservoir, and that is based on the current structure of the intake. So the structure that draws water into your treatment plant is at an elevation that the dredging would not improve the depth of water for the intake. It would all be below that lower intake elevation. It's certainly an option. It's been discussed in the past. But for the purpose of this evaluation, it would not benefit the water system as a whole.
Here's another question. How does the 41% water loss play into the village discussion? And if we give up our system, who covers the cost, I guess it would be, who covers the cost of that water?
So as related to the current significant quantity of water that is unaccounted for per village records, our current understanding of this, and our to the best of our knowledge, based on speaking with the village, including the water treatment plant operator and public works officials, is that that is suspected to be a metering issue. That 41% of the water is not being lost, but there are metering challenges and unmetered properties which are resulting in 41% of the water, or whatever the amount stated in the report is, being unaccounted for. So that's our current understanding, and that would fall as part of the distribution system improvements that would be needed regardless of the alternative selected by the village.
Okay. A couple of questions here. One question, how likely is it that if wells are drilled, water will be hit? That's the first question. And the second question, how firm is the pricing with Dunkirk if the village chooses to partner with them?
So I cannot answer the first question.
Okay.
The question related to what are the odds of finding groundwater? Our team has a very, very experienced hydrogeologist who did his best to select sites with the highest probability of a field investigation going well and finding a viable source of groundwater, but I can't put a number on how likely success is for those field investigations. The second question relates to how firm the pricing is for purchasing water from the city of Dunkirk. We've been told by the city that that price is $3.87 per 1,000 gallons, and that is the rate at which the city sells water to the North Chautauqua County Water District. So as far as I know, it is firm, but I would welcome other comment from either the city directly or from the village board.
Here's another question. There has been significant erosion on the land separating the water treatment plant and the dam and spillway. 30 years ago, there was room for picnic tables. Now there are just a few feet. What is the rate of erosion expected going forward?
So I agree with the question, the premise of the question, which is that there is erosion. There is evidence of erosion occurring along the slope that is very close to the existing water treatment plant building. And as far as the rate of future erosion, I think it would be incumbent upon any improvements project at the water treatment plant to include a very dedicated, significant effort to fully stabilize that slope, to reduce the rate of erosion either to zero or to very close to zero. As the question noted, there's not much space between the edge of the existing water treatment plant building and the top of that slope. So certainly a significant effort would need to be taken and significant diligence would need to be applied to designing a slope stabilization system that would immediately stabilize that slope and last for the long term with some, maintenance from village personnel.
And we got more questions. Regarding the existing Fredonia water treatment plant, how practical is it to expand into the adjacent landlocked parking lot or to simply relocate it?
We did not consider relocating the treatment plant. As far as the feasibility of expanding the building into the parking lot to construct a third clarifier, I do agree there, as I noted in the presentation, that there are significant site constraints at the treatment plant. So I do think that taking up a decent portion of the footprint that is currently parking lot and converting that into a portion of the building within which there's a third clarifier would be a significant undertaking and would, certainly require the parking lot and a flat space for parking and unloading and offloading of chemicals to be used in the treatment process. Would require that to be relocated, which would include other earthwork and possible retaining walls and such at the treatment plant. So I agree with the premise of the question that it will be challenging, but that is the concept that we've envisioned and outlined here as part of Alternative 1.
If Dunkirk water is supplied to the village, where and how would the orthophosphate dosing be implemented? At the tie line pumping stations? And how would this be monitored to ensure no corrosion damage to existing village piping?
So we envision the addition of orthophosphate at the interconnection pump station. And the current monitoring practices surrounding corrosion control would, excuse me, would be largely unchanged. So there would be it would be flow-paced so that as the flow into the village system changes, the dose of orthophosphate would change, the flow of orthophosphate would change to maintain the desired dose. And then, corrosion control and the status of corrosion and water quality throughout the existing distribution system would be monitored by public works officials, the same as it's practiced currently.
Here's another question about the water treatment plant. The water treatment plant cliff were to be stabilized due to erosion. How would this be done?
Conceptually, we envision a gabion wall that is tied into the slope itself.
Now, who produces the annual water quality report? Each community or the Chautauqua County Health Department?
I believe the answer to that question is each community is responsible for their own annual water quality report.
Okay. Now, many areas of the report are redacted. What legal statutes require this? It would be helpful to know why each are being redacted. That's the question. Sure.
I don't need a microphone. Can everybody hear me? I'm Natalie White from the Chautauqua County Health Department, and I am the person who requires that redaction. We could not share source locations. We can't share locations of critical infrastructure that could be tampered with. We can't literally take our pants down and say, hey, the water treatment plant can't handle this specific parameter, go tamper with it. We have to make sure that this water system remains safe until such a point where it can either be rebuilt or replaced.
Okay.
Thank you.
Here's another question. Are the relative project cost estimates presented tonight the same as those in the budget point sheets that were seen before?
I'm not familiar with the budget points sheets seen before that are being referenced in that
Okay.
question.
Why are the water treatment plant and reservoir described as being in R1 and R3, but they are both in a C1 district?
I think the references in that question to R1, R2, and C3 refer to village zoning. Is that how the board would understand that?
That's correct.
Town zoning. Thank you. I don't know the answer. Mayor, do you have a comment there?
I'm not familiar with the town zoning, so I cannot answer that correctly.
Here's another question. Why is section 2.2 SUNY Fredonia described as out of district when it's clearly in the village?
I believe it's because I don't have the report in front of me, which would explain this for us. Alyssa or Anne-Marie, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but the village itself is the district, am I correct? And SUNY Fredonia is charged and billed differently than the remainder of the village, or separately, by separate processes, is that correct?
Yes, they're not billed in our water billing system.
Okay, so the response would be that the report is written to reflect that response from Alyssa, that they're not in the village billing system in district.
As far as billing goes.
Right.
But as far as boundaries of the village, the SUNY system is within the village boundaries.
Correct.
Here's another question. Why is 2.2.1, table 14, are some entities listed twice?
I don't have a copy of the report in front of me, and I don't know.
I don't know
Offhand.
if anyone else has.
You see that, and I'll see if I can get
Yeah.
back to you on here.
Okay, we'll get back to that question, hopefully with an answer. Here's another question while we're waiting for some answers. Are you able to estimate a time frame from commencement to completion for each of the three options?
The short answer is no. And it goes back to this discussion of phasing. If the village is able to phase the project in a manner that is acceptable to the Department of Health, the village could do so to maximize the amount of grant funding it could receive. However, phasing the project, phase 1, 2, however many phases, it does lengthen the overall period of time between start of phase 1 and completion of the final phase. If the Department of Health were to say the village, shall proceed with everything immediately upon selection, which I do not believe is the case, the timeline would certainly be shortened. It would be easier to estimate. But until selection of an alternative and selection of which grant opportunities to pursue and which regulations the village, which funding agency requirements the village must follow based on grant funds awarded, it's very challenging with any specificity at all to estimate timeline to completion for any of these alternatives.
Now we're going to go back to the previous question. I think Mayor Essick has some answers.
Yes, on table 14, it's commercial water user consumption within the village. Some of the commercial water users have more than one main water meter coming into their business. So if there's more than one meter, it's reflected here on the chart as multiple times that they're on the chart. So that would reflect multiple meters for each of the commercial users.
You might want to keep that handy because there's another question. Section 3.5.31, the reservoir is listed as 5.7 acres. Why?
Matt's looking that up for me. The short and obvious answer is the reservoir is much more than 5.7 acres. I believe it's more on the scale of probably 570 acres. So that may be a simple type mistake.
And the watershed is 5.7 square miles.
That's correct, yeah. Looking at the context here. Yeah, that's correct. It is referencing the watershed for the reservoir, not the reservoir itself. And that is a 5.7 square mile area, not acre.
Here's another question, Section 3.0, Table 19. Are we to conclude that the section marked sufficient deficiencies are recommendations since there are no regulations cited?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question,
Okay.
please? We're trying to locate the reference.
Yeah. It's Section 3.0, Table 19. And the question is, are we to conclude that the section marked sufficient deficiencies are recommendations since there are no regulations cited?
So Table 19, as described in the paragraph that immediately precedes it, is a summary of Chautauqua County Health Department water system inspection findings. It notes violations with a specific subpart cited of NYCRR. It notes significant deficiencies and recommendations. And so that is, those terms, violations, significant deficiencies, recommendations, are all taken verbatim from the Chautauqua County Department of Health water system inspection records. So, Natalie, perhaps you can comment further on this, but there is a citation for the violations, and there was no specific citation for things marked as a significant deficiency or a recommendation.
I can comment that significant deficiencies are not recommendations. Anything that is considered a significant deficiency is something that could be related to a public health concern. So they must be addressed. They're not optional.
Okay. Here's another question. Approximately how many years of continuing to upgrade and improve our system would we be investing in a system that would be discarded? I don't know if that's a question for the board or for the engineers.
I think for the alternatives presented here and really just a general answer related to public water supplies, public water systems, I think it's a continual process of upgrading the system. You know, everything from significant projects, capital projects here and there, to the, annual day in, day out addressing problematic spots in the distribution system, including hydrant replacements or valve replacements. I think what comes to mind first is that it's a continual process of upgrades, big and small.
Another question, this is about apparently the rates. Isn't the yearly increase 3 cents, not 3%? That's what the question is.
Sorry, could you read it one more time?
Yeah.
Please?
Isn't the yearly increase 3 cents, not 3%?
Okay. The yearly increase 3 cents instead of 3%. I'm going to assume that's in reference to the cost per 1,000 gallons that the city is offering to sell water to the village.
I'm assuming, yeah, it doesn't.
Sure.
The 3 cent within the North County Water District is by contract, 40-year contract between the North County Water District and the City of Dunkirk. It was relatively easy as things go to negotiate. And I think there was a prior question, how would that be stabilized? Negotiate a very similar contract or maybe duplicate that contract. Everybody would want a long-term contract, so you could plan both on the city side and the village side. So that was on average, it will work out to be about 3% per year going forward. But it's actually more complicated than Dr. Rennell, economist, California Water PhD, very skilled guy. We'll talk later on the city side.
Thank you.
Another question, what is a high elevation customer? How many and why do we have to supply them? Are they in the village?
Sure, good question, and I apologize for not being more descriptive in my initial note about them. I'm going to flip to a slide to show a graphical representation of this. If I have it. Nope, I don't have it. Okay, so I'll just do so orally. There's a significant elevation change, elevation relative to sea level, let's say, from the highest part of the village system at the treatment plant and the highest customers, who live in households up there. Some of them along Spoden Road, notably including a BOCES facility in that neighborhood, down to the customers at the northern end of the village who represent those who live at the lowest elevation relative to sea level. So references to low elevation, high elevation are simply based on the existing topography of the village's service area, which extends all the way from the area at the treatment plant, which is significantly higher in elevation relative to sea level, sloping down as you go northward to the village extent to the north.
Okay, we have one more question, and again, we still have runners here, so if anyone else has a question, just raise your hand and someone will give you a 3x5 card. But right now, this appears to be our last question. If alternative 1 is selected, is there any discussion of a connection for SUNY from Dunkirk if needed?
That is so a connection from Dunkirk for SUNY. It was a question, correct?
Yeah, that's
from Dunkirk for SUNY. So no, that is not something that we evaluated. Mayor, do you have any comment or insight on that question?
Yes, SUNY Fredonia is a customer of Fredonia. It's within the village limits of Fredonia. Therefore, arbitrarily, an outside water source cannot come in and provide water to a customer within the village. It would have to go through the Village of Fredonia lines. That's basically the rough answer on that.
One other question that was just submitted. Are the trustees going to have their questions answered publicly tonight? They have mentioned in previous meetings that they had more questions for Labella. So I don't know if that's a question for any of the trustees here.
I can say the questions that I had submitted to Labella have been answered before today. I had quite a few of them, and I got answers to all of them.
Is there anyone else on the board that either has a question tonight for the engineers or?
I do. I believe I did send you information that years ago Dunkirk was looking at a study of possibly putting in a water tank by the Vineyard Drive station. And this would provide water to both Dunkirk and Fredonia in case Dunkirk needed water. But because it would be at a lower elevation, it wouldn't be up in the air, we wouldn't have to worry about, you know, the surge of the pressure of water. Have you looked into that?
So regardless of the alternative selected by the village, it's openly acknowledged that an additional finished water storage tank will be needed to address that. The question is where to put it. And when we considered that question and the option of siting a tank within village limits, kind of generally near the center of the village, one challenging constraint is the presence of the Chautauqua County Airport to the northeast. FAA regulations prohibit the construction of structures that are, I gather you're not.
What I meant.
Okay.
It would be like, do you know where Home Depot is? They have a tank. And it's lower, it's on the ground. And this tank could be filled with water during the night.
Could you talk closer to the mic,
Okay.
please?
This water could be filled into that tank at night so as not to take away from anybody on Vineyard Drive. And this would provide us with water for an emergency and also Dunkirk for water in case of an emergency. And the pressure from that water tank wouldn't be as great as it is now. It wouldn't have anything to do with airplanes.
So the challenge we ran up against, again, for any tank, pretty much any tank within the village, was that to be high, to provide the minimum required pressure in the distribution system, it would have to be so high that the FAA rules would come into play. And so any sort of like ground storage tank would require pumps right next to it.
We have a pump there already that we could use.
And that's the Vineyard Drive pump station?
That's correct.
Pumps? Okay.
That's correct.
So it is not something we,
I would hope that you would look into that.
so my understanding of the Village Drive pump station is that it is not designed to provide, it is designed for use, I believe it's up to 300 gallons per minute at a continuous basis, and in emergencies, up to 700 or 800 gallons per minute. Our focus on any sort of finished water storage was to focus on it as a, down in the village limits there, in the, near the center of the village, was in conjunction with one of the alternatives, 2 and 3, that would involve an interconnect. And so that would, the tank and the pumps associated with that would be sized not only to be used as an emergency, but to satisfy all demand, daily demand, peak demand, and fire flow demand. In alternative 1, where the village would be upgrading its treatment plant and upgrading its reservoir and spillway and dam, our recommendation is to maintain the Vineyard Drive pump station, certainly for, just as you're describing, for
This could be something
some
added,
use. And so we didn't consider, we did consider and recommend what to do with that pump station. And, we thought it's beneficial to maintain because it's an existing
Right.
interconnect. But we did not consider the possible need for any sort of storage tank at that location.
Okay. Well, I'd like for you to look into that.
Yes, please, Randy.
Vineyard Drive pump station, water tank science is kind of complicated. They calculate right down to the hundredth of a gallon, stuff like that. You want to make sure that
You have to get closer.
you want to make sure that your water stays fresh and cycles through the tank. So just having a tank there ready for something could be done, but it would be,
We
it'd
could
be
use
nice to.
that water.
Let
Yeah.
him answer, please.
Please
Go
go on.
ahead.
Please
Continue.
go on.
It would be nice to float on the system The pressure, the city side is about 65 pounds per square inch. To float on the system, the tank at Vineyard Drive would have to be 150 feet tall. If you want to float on the village system where the pressure is 137 pounds per square inch, it would have to be over 300 feet tall if you want to float on the system and keep the water fresh. So good thing to think about, but when you do the calculations, it makes it even more difficult. The tank at Home Depot is a fire protection tank. Those are, from time to time, you see them around almost everywhere where you have a big place that has to have a large instantaneous fire flow. The Vineyard Drive pump station is on a capillary line, and the whole Vineyard Drive is capillary. So Home Depot had to build a tank because they can't immediately get fire flow type of flow at that location. So we're thinking about, you know, you got great engineers here. As we move along, we could think about it some more. Thanks.
Thank you.
And we have one more question. Wouldn't the water rates per thousand drop significantly if Fredonia were to join the Northern Chautauqua Water District?
So the North Chautauqua County Water District purchases from Dunkirk at a current rate of $3.87 per 1,000 gallons. So our thought was that the village would get the best price by purchasing directly from the city, rather than having the water district purchase from the city and then the village purchase from the water district. Because our assumption would be that the North Chautauqua County Water District rate would be higher, even if just a little bit, than that $3.87 per 1,000 gallons that Dunkirk is selling it water for. So that was our thought about, I don't know if any board members have thoughts on that, but that was our thought about that possibility.
Absolutely, that was the thought process. Instead of going through a wholesaler, which would be the North County Water District, which has been on the radar for a number of years with the Village of Fredonia. It just made more economical sense to go directly with the supplier, the city of Dunkirk, and realize the same rates. I'm not sure, I don't have the figures. I'm not part of North County Water District or their board. I don't know what that would mean with the numbers of Fredonia rate users, if that was added to the district rate users, what that would mean as far as rates for everyone in the district. But currently, if we could purchase water at the same rate as the North County Water District, that would make the most sense instead of going through a wholesaler and having our rates increased, possibly.
That was the final question, so I think we're to the point now for comments from the public.
Could I ask a question to Randy?
Sure.
Randy, if I could ask you a question, sir? Being that we're looking at option 2, which is running a trunk line from Dunkirk with a pumping station, technically we would be building infrastructure in the city of Dunkirk. Is there a possibility of Dunkirk helping with the cost of that infrastructure?
I could write my personal check for $10 million right now, but it wouldn't go very far.
We'll take it.
Okay. I think that I like the concept of working together on ideas like that. Also, the regional thing, as Matt pointed out, comes up very green for grant opportunities. If you work together, if you combine, if you collaborate and work regionally, neighbor to neighbor, there's opportunities there for using the leverage between the two of us as a synergy to get more money. If the city were to participate with a contract and actually build some of this infrastructure, we probably would want to have a longer-term contract like we have the North County Water District to pay that debt service back. Mayor Rosas invested $25 million. A lot of that was grant because of his connections with Albany. Kate Doviesh has the same kind of connections with Albany. We would hope to be able to leverage that with her and make this a win-win for everybody. So as a joke, we don't have it immediately available, but we'd work with you to find it.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, the study,
To the mic, Jim.
the study is mainly concerned with the initial cost of these changes. It doesn't necessarily direct any consideration for the long-term view. So in the long-term view, if you went with the city of Dunkirk to pump water into, for any other options other than staying with what we have, you'd have to have pump stations that are mechanical, that require maintenance, repairs, people to do that, replacements, just like we did at the recent Vineyard Drive station, a very large cost. But also the continuous pumping, which is energy, the cost of energy. And so with what we currently have as a gravity feed never fails, okay? But when you have pump stations, they can fail. You could be without water because there's no pump station. Is there no consideration was in this study for the long-term view of how often do these pumps need to be replaced or maintained? What are the future costs going to be for that? The maintenance and costs added to what we have, projected for initial costs. And is that something that would be looked at?
Thank you for the question. So, trustee, Appendix J includes a life cycle cost analysis projecting 30 years out for each of the three alternatives. So in that life cycle cost analysis, it includes a 30-year projection of operating costs, maintenance costs, short-lived asset costs, debt service costs, purchase of water costs, all tallied up into
Well,
a spreadsheet that does.
That's based on the need to borrow for 30 years. And now our system we've had currently for nearly 100 years. I'm looking, like I said, into the future. We're beyond me, myself, and I'm not going to be here, or someone else, and the people in our community. Where is it going to end? Where is it going to be in the future? Reservoirs can be maintained, for many years, and like I said, gravity never fails. So I'm looking beyond this, beyond the initial costs, beyond the 30-year expenditure, beyond the 30-year cost of the borrowing. And that's what you're basing this on, is actually the borrowing of the cost of the initial construction.
I agree with you that we did not look beyond 30 years. I think it's a very good consideration by the trustees and by the board to think beyond that 30-year planning horizon. The challenge with looking beyond 30 years is, especially when considering the financial part of projecting beyond 30 years, is no one has a crystal ball. And so it just becomes more and more abstract, in my opinion, the farther beyond 30 years one projects. So we do typically use the duration of the loan as our planning horizon.
Is there any other questions from the board? We have one more written
One
question.
more from the public. The amount of $2.96 per thousand for purchased water. How much water purchase was used to arrive at the above rate? The annual amount, was it the only amount of 1.32 thousand per day? I don't know if that makes...
I understand the question, I think. So I believe the question is addressing this line item in the purchase water row here. the second most from the bottom that says in alternative 2 or 3, the cost to purchase water would be $2.96 million that the village would have to pay the city to purchase water to satisfy demands. So I'll give background about where that number comes from. The village average day demand established during the course of the study based on recent years of operating record is about 1.32 million gallons per day. So we took, for year 1, the purchase water cost would be 1.32 million gallons per day divided by 1,000 times $3.87 per 1,000 gallons. And I believe that number is about $1.9 million. And then, assuming a rate increase annually of 3%, we calculate that again in year 2, and year 3, and year 4, and year 5, up to year 30. And where that $2.96 million number comes from is the average of those 30 values.
Okay, one other question, I'm not sure if someone has a question, but page 22, section 2.2.11, further explain the 2024 intended use plan proposed by DOH. That's page 22.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the reference, please?
Yeah, page 22, section 2.2.11.
They're talking about the state revolving loan fund, the intended use plan.
I've lost the reference. So that any reference to the intended use plan would be a reference to the state revolving fund, which is a funding program operated by New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation. And by listing one's project on the intended use plan and having it scored by the New York State Environmental Facilities Corporation, the community takes an important step toward receiving grant and loan funding. So references to the intended use plan is the list of communities who have proceeded or begun projects that they hope one day to have funded.
Okay, Mayor, that was the final question.
Great, thank you very much for everyone who submitted a question. I hope your questions were answered fully. We will now move on to the public portion to come up and speak. Would you read the portion, please?
All individuals speaking will have 3 minutes if speaking on behalf of themselves, or 5 minutes if speaking on behalf of a group. Please state that you're speaking on behalf of a group when you come to the microphone, otherwise I'm assuming it's 3 minutes. All individuals signing up for the public comment will be called in order during the public comment period. Please note that the board and trustees, mayor, and invitees of the village will not be answering questions during the public comment period.
Also, please note that we have quite a few speakers tonight, and we will need to adhere to the 3-minute or 5-minute portion here. So if you run to that portion, I will ask you to step back. So thank you.
Want me to announce? Okay, we have the first speaker, Bob Clark.
Thank you, Mayor and Board, for letting us be part of this. Thought you guys did a great job up here. I've been in that seat before. It's tough. I'm a fan of the reservoir, and I know we're looking at other alternatives, but I focused on that myself. And I absolutely understand why we're here and why we're talking about it, because we do need to do work up there. From my background as part of this, I've learned a lot, but I was at the Labella presentation for the preliminary report. I got to read the preliminary report as redacted as it was. I've been following the newspaper, I'm following social media accounts, different pieces that people have written, and anything I can put my hands on to back up, what I'm going to say. But it does feel like a push to get the village to move to Lake Erie water, and I'm reacting to that as I say this. Whether it is or not, it just feels like it. So for what? Because it's cheaper? No, I think it costs more to buy. Because the cost is distributed to users? No, only that usage is metered. Because it's all ready to go? No, a great deal of construction is required. But those costs are shared between municipalities? No, so far Fredonia pays for it all. Because it gives us better control of our water? No, it takes that away. To make money then? No, we lose the revenue stream and still have to pay for our infrastructure. Oh, because it adds resiliency to the regional water supply? No, it removes the water supply. Then because it leverages our investment to control our future? No, that's gone too. Okay, then because it's better water quality? No, then it doesn't taste better. Because no one has looked at it before? No, it was, and it wasn't cost favorable then either. So why are we looking at the alternative source? Because there are other issues. But many of them are mitigated with the Labella proposed improvements to the Fredonia water plant, except drought. And what I did learn by talking to somebody that we did have 2 100-year droughts in the 90s, but between real-time mitigations, including dipping into the Lilydale Lake and user restraint, we were still able to keep the Buffalo Bills happy on the practice field at SUNY. I've seen a lot of pieces in support of the water supply that we have, but I've not seen that many comparable from those who would change it. Much of it seems to rely on alarming language. I'd like to just move on from this and discuss mitigating the issues that we have and move on with plans for added resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We have Andrew Ludwig next, followed by Kara Christina. So Andrew Ludwig.
Sitting here, I'm reminded of a Fram oil commercial, Fram oil filters. Pay me now or pay me later. Later has arrived. The water infrastructure in the village has been neglected for decades. It's going to cost us a lot to fix it. We should not give up our independence, our water independence, one of the only commodities that we have remaining in the village. I implore the board to go with option 1. Upgrade the water treatment plant, upgrade the reservoir. And I would suggest that since we've gone to all the trouble to have this forum to hear from the public, that we have a referendum so we can hear from all of the public in a vote.
Okay, we have Kara Christina, followed by Sam Dreo. So Sam Dreo, you're up next.
No,
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Per person.
this is, the rules were read in the beginning. 3 minutes per person, please. Thank you. We don't
In
follow
Congress.
Robert's Rules of Order, sir.
Years ago, quite a few years ago, when I was first village attorney, I had an engineer mention to me, he said, "You know, Sam, you have quite a beautiful water system." I had no clue what he was talking about because I turned on the faucet and the water was there. I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he said, "Your water comes to your customers throughout the village without any pumping stations, without any use of electricity. That is still a major advantage that we have to keeping our system. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that we have 3 major water districts. We actually have 7 water districts in the village. I was involved in negotiating all of them except for the Berry Road Water District, which is a large water district. We have the North County Water District. My last time I talked to the town, there was 255 homes. We have the Chestnut Street Water District, another large water district. I don't see how efficiently and cost-wise, the city of Dunkirk, through one line, can pump that water to all those users. I just find that very difficult to believe unless there's a number of pumping stations and water towers, which are very expensive. And the other item that I'd like to mention is before the board does anything, if it involves Dunkirk, don't make any assumptions. Get a memorandum of agreement first. You don't want to make decisions, go ahead with even letting out bids, and find out that Dunkirk and Fredonia are on opposite ends on certain issues. In contracts that Dunkirk would have with Fredonia, we would be like a water district to Dunkirk. Dunkirk's not a water authority. We'd be like a district. They'd want a contract with the village, and there's terms and conditions in every contract. We don't know what those would be. Right now, I would say we're safer to stay with the village water system, be independent, upgrade our system, and I think we'll be in good shape.
Thank you.
Now we have Bob Scott, followed by Frank Pagano.
I was one of 3 speakers at last Monday's meeting, and I was restricted to 3 minutes, but told afterwards that I'd have more time this week. I guess that fell by the wayside. So I've got to pick and choose some from my comments here. I watched again the presentation from the County Health Department and LaBella Associates from September 5th and the 13th. These are some bullet points I'd like to point out. When discussing slide 9 in the County Health Department presentation on September 5th, Ms. Whiteman stated that there is not enough groundwater in this area to supply the needs shown. This seems to contradict LaBella's thoughts on the groundwater alternative that they presented. Slides 19 and 20 of the LaBella presentation both state, quote, implement distribution system improvements regardless of the alternative selected. During discussion on slide 26, it was stated that the estimated cost is $7.5 million was inflated from the original report to today's dollars, but was excluded from the upcoming cost comparison on the other slide. Let's see here. Slide 27 of LaBella discussion included the statement that there is presently over 50% elevated risk of corrosion problems with our distribution system. I'm going to skip over that. I'm going to go to this. A couple of trustees have stated that by not staying with our present system, and I quote, a key source of revenue to offset other village costs and avoid property tax increases would be lost. First of all, the key source of revenue resulted in a loss of $543,688 in the fiscal year of 2022 to 2023 per a February report, with the money coming out of the unreserved balance of the water department. And even with a 15-cent increase in the water rates in the last budget, an April 26, 2023 projection shows a loss of $412,697 to be incurred this fiscal year. Secondly, the water department is supposed to be an enterprise fund, which is a type of fund used in government accounting to account for activities that produce goods and services to the public for a fee that is meant to make the entity self-sustaining per superfastcpa.com. It is unfair for village residents to make up in property taxes for a loss incurred.
That's 3 minutes, Mr. Scott.
I wish I could go on.
Thank you.
We have Frank Pagano next, followed by Richard Leone.
Good evening. I'd like to just disagree with my good friend Sam Drayo, and we are good friends. Can you put that slide up on the cost again? While it might cost the village it's 2.96 million a year for water. First of all, let me just say, let me get wound up here. Just say that the plant is in deplorable condition. Absolutely been deplorable, hasn't been maintained at all. It needs more infrastructure, more money, and that is not sustainable. That plant cannot last 10 more years. And if we have to borrow $25 million to overhaul that plant, if we don't get any grants, the cost of borrowing that money and the principal is going to raise our water rates 200 or 300%, because we have to pay the money back. Now, I think if we can sit down and get an agreement with the city of Dunkirk, a good agreement that everybody's on board with, we could save money by, one, closing the plant down, eliminating all the employees there. Two, eliminating all the maintenance on that plant that's costing us a small fortune now. Get rid of the water tank that hasn't been used in months and months anyway. And with those savings, we could pay for that $2.96 million in water cost to the village. I was always a fan of keeping water in the village of Fredonia, but we have gotten so far off base with that plant that it's just not what, the spillway is in terrible, dangerous condition. The clarifiers are not regularly cleaned. We've had two in the last year of water.
Boil water?
Yes, boil water. We've had two. How many more? You know, we have a college up the street. People read that Fredonia has got water problems, and they say, we're not going to bring our kid there. It's really, if you guys...
That's 3 minutes, Mr. Pagano.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Richard Leone, followed by Mark Twitchell.
Thank you for the presentation. My apologies, Mr. Mayor. Sometimes I get a little talkative. My particular opinion is quite a bit like Sam Durio's, that the existing water system is an asset that we should not easily give up. We should not do anything in a fast and quick manner to make any determination about how we do the following projects. And we should also start to look at other assets the village has, like the planning board and other involved people, the management groups for the village, and start putting them to analyzing a 75-page report that really is an overview. It's detailed, but it's an overview. There's a lot of what-ifs in that report. So I would suggest that we really start to think about how we're going to go ahead, put a plan together to develop a plan to determine what alternative we want to use. This is not something that we can jump into and have a special meeting next Friday and decide, yep, we're going to go to alternative 2. Or nope, we're going to keep the village plan the way it is. We really have to take a long, hard look at this. And my sense of it is that there's a lot of pressure out there, like Rob Clark said, that is pushing to eliminate the plant in the existing system. Simply for what? If you look at total costs, the existing system renovation is over a period of 30 years, I believe, and I may be wrong, but I believe from my reading of the report, is like close to $40 million less than alternative 2, and probably some 30 million or 25 million less than alternative 3. So, if we're talking cost even, all right, there is a real reason to look at updating that plant. Any facility can be upgraded. The amount of time and effort and money you want to put into it is the question. And we have some serious issues with maintenance and serious issues with management. And they should be addressed along with this plan to upgrade whatever system we decide to use. That's pretty much all I have to say. So thank you for your presentations, and let's take some time to really think through what we have to do with this whole situation.
Thank you.
Now we have Mark Twitchell, followed by Richard Ketchum.
Thank you to the board. Thank you to Labella for the work that you guys have put into this. I own 6 residential units in the village, and I am retired from a village business that is dependent on village water for day-to-day service to its clients. I see no reason for the village to abandon its economical and safe water supply resources. My concerns about decommissioning Fredonia's water processing system are expressed in accordance with the village board's responsibility to its constituents' well-being. Primary to well-being is a well-informed and participating public in making major decisions. The Fredonia Planning Board represents the interests of the village residents, but it has not been consulted in this matter. Residents are also not informed of at least 2 possible referendum opportunities to have their direct say as per New York State municipal law. In my opinion, a proposal to close down Fredonia's system is a Type 1 action under the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, because it carries known and potential negative consequences to the village and its taxpayers. A complete environmental impact statement is required to document that a hard look has been taken, including public input, as I previously described, also the impact on the village budget, and the regional impact of losing an alternative water source. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Richard Ketchum, followed by Grace Perez de la Garza.
Hello. Thanks again for the meeting tonight. I also have been at several of the prior presentations. And one of the things I took away was to upgrade the water plant would be about $25 million. And we were also told that we should plan to budget a roughly equivalent amount every 25 years. That is, the plant would have to be replaced every 25 years. So there is going to be significant ongoing costs if we continue to operate the plant. One of the things that LaBelle hasn't been able to confirm, and I understand it because the test wells haven't been drilled, but I think I was told, if I understood it properly at the prior meeting, there'd be somewhere between $100,000 to $300,000 to do the test wells. I would ask, what's the likelihood of success, which was one of my questions, but what's their likelihood or percentage of success in past places where they've recommended drilling? Because there are many places, including like the city of Jamestown, for example, that gets all its water from wells. So, you know, it's not some far out thing, And if it's a 50, 60, 70% chance, in my opinion, I think it should be explored. You know, if it's a 2% chance, then you wouldn't. If someone told me 70% chance that you're going to hit it, and it's going to cost you a couple $100,000, and if you do so, you're going to save $1.5 million every year for the next 50 years, I'd like to know where I could sign up. I think you get investors to do that. So I think we should seriously consider that. Another very important thing I look at is grant possibilities. I've been involved, whether it be in healthcare or the community foundation and other places, where we've been very, very active in getting grants. And one thing I know for sure, we're not going to get the grants if we go alone. We will get the grants if we work with other communities. And I think it's a huge issue. There's tens of millions of dollars that I think we forfeit if we try to go on our own. My last point is, and it's a question, I did put it in writing, it didn't get read, for maybe got lost, but water loss. My understanding is, again, we have about 40% water loss. If in fact that can be curtailed significantly, which the director of DPW says we put new meters in, we could, and the meters are not that expensive, then if we had, I would think you'd have to buy 40% less water, or 30% less water, or 25% less water. There's a lot of money if we can put in meters and get paid for what we're producing and delivering. So I do think the issue of new meters, no matter what we do, has to be addressed quickly. Thank you.
Grace Perez, followed by David Friedman.
Can you hear me? Get closer? Okay. All right. I'm speaking for myself, of course, not for a group. One of my concerns is because the state of Ohio has already declared they're going to install windmills in Lake Erie as fast as they can. To do that, to install the pads or bases, they're going to have to seriously dig up the lake bottom, which obviously is full of heavy metals and toxins that have been, say, dormant thanks to some sediment over it. And all those heavy metals and toxins will be coming this way. So personally, I think Fredonia is not just for this reason, but for many reasons, it'd be way further ahead, keeping our own water system and having an interconnect and be ready to help our neighbors when they need it. Thank you.
David Friedman, followed by Jim Sedota.
Hi, Dave Friedman speaking for myself, although I shouldn't fail to mention that I am on the Fredonia Planning Board. I think after reading and going through this presentation, viewing the previous one, section 6.4 of the redacted report really says it all. Option 1 is the clear winner with the lowest cost per user and the lowest simple total cost over the next 30 years. Having a safe, clean, and separate water source, along with additional bidirectional interconnects, will serve Fredonia and the surrounding municipalities well far into the future. As recommended in section 5.5.5 and other sections, actions being considered should be done in conjunction with other local stakeholders, as a preponderance of the actions being considered take place in Pomfret and will directly impact Pomfret residents as well as village residents. Additionally, I'd like to say that in each and every scenario being proposed, continued maintenance and upgrades are required to keep our existing water supply safe and flowing, and to avoid penalties issued to the village by either county, state, or the EPA. Once these sunk costs exist, they can only be recouped reasonably by choosing option 1, the most cost-efficient long-term solution to the village and surrounding area, where we continue to maintain, upgrade, and operate our reservoir and water treatment plant. Thank you.
Jim Sedota, followed by Greg Krause.
I want to address the cost, the annual cost for both of these, alternate 1 and alternate 3. Alternate 1 is the least expensive cost. The alternate 3, even with a grant, you're looking at $11 or $12 per 1,000 gallons. Our present rate is $4.95. Now, that might seem alarming, but these are not my numbers. I took the village budget, then I annualized then I added the cost to purchase water from Dunkirk, which you heard earlier is over $1,800,000 dollars. And then I annualized the debt service cost. Now, getting a grant only affects the debt service cost. It's only going to reduce that cost by a couple dollars a thousand. You need to get a financial analyst who specializes in rate studies so that before you make any decisions on this, because this is really important. And I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I'm just encouraging you to do that. Thank you.
Now we have Greg Krause, Jay Warren, followed by Mitch Cummings.
Is Jay Warren here? Okay.
Okay, Mitch Cummings, you're next.
Thank you, Board, for this presentation this evening. It was interesting that one of the people that came up to talked about the drought years in the 90s when they ran a pipeline from the Casadega Lakes down to the reservoir, down Glasgow Road and that was missed by Labella. They said that they didn't go back that far to look at the drought years, I believe, in their footnotes. And also they used demographic data about population that's also somewhat dated. And both of those things are not taking into account climate change, which is really hard to take into account, and what the future might bring as far as drought years or storms with a lot of water that could cause problems with the reservoir and the condition that it is now. And I just wondered about future references to those possibilities. Also, the increase in population is this part of the country is going to be looked at as a receiving geography for climate migrants, and that should be something that should be looked into too. The other aspect is with retaining the reservoir, I'm not sure about what the risks are, total risks are, as far as like insurance and liability for the village to maintain the reservoir as is, and as far as that goes. And also going to a number of board meetings and listening to board members talk about a meeting they had with the Northern County Water District, disparaging remarks and kind of laughter and stuff. I wonder about the level of trust between the three entities, the city of Dunkirk, the village of Fredonia, and the North District, and that there was no other option about possibly entering into a pact with the Water District and what that might entail, and what the benefits, what the pros and the cons are of that. So just those are some of the things that are on my mind.
And we have the final speaker, Mark Romanowski, Brooks Memorial.
Good evening. Mark Romanowski for Brooks Memorial Hospital. Thank you very much to the board for putting this presentation on, and to the gentleman from Labella for presenting the materials. Brooks Memorial doesn't take any particular position with the chosen pathway, ultimately, that the village and the engineers work out together. but rather the urgency with which that process moves forward. The hospital is concerned, and of course, quality water supply is critical to a hospital, and certainly the hospital is concerned about this being a delayed process that ultimately impacts their ability to move forward with the site, and in particular with the Department of Health. Thank you.
It's our final speaker.
Would anyone from the board like to comment? Your comment, go ahead.
If everybody would be comfortable here, and you don't have to, certainly, I'd kind of like a show of hands if you guys have a feeling as to option 1, option 2, or option 3, just to get a general stasis for what the crowd here would like. So if you guys don't mind sticking up an arm for me, just give me an idea. Where is everybody leaning with option 1 as opposed to 2 and 3? Okay. What about option 2? Okay, and option 3? Okay, thank you very much.
I had what,
Those amounts of money that are going to be responsible for each household, how will that be paid? On the tax roll or as part of the water bill? That $1,500, $1,200, or $1,300, how will each household be responsible for paying that money? Is it going to be added to the taxes or added to the water bill?
Okay,
So
this is not a question and answer.
So I have a statement that sort of kind of addresses your question without, because we're not going to answer questions at this point. I think everybody needs to keep in mind that at our current water rate of $4.95 per 1,000 gallons, that, you know, our option of keeping the reservoir is based upon, we are not currently breaking even. In order to even break even as we are, if our water system was perfect, we need to at least double that. So I think everybody needs to keep that in mind, that the option that we choose, we are looking at it based on not our current rates, but what we need to do in order to just not be losing hundreds of thousands of dollars every quarter in producing water. We are looking at, you know, in order to do that, we would have to be raising our rates. And then in order to be sinking the level of money that we need to be sinking into upgrading our infrastructure, we then need to be probably raising the base fee and citing, you know, paying for X, Y, and Z. So that's a tidbit that everybody needs to keep in mind is, you know, the things aren't going to stay as they are regardless.
on the
Go ahead.
mention of the base fee for infrastructure would be regardless who we go with. I don't know if the base fee for the village, if we stay with our own system, because we'd be selling water for the, not only within our village, but outside the village. And then we currently have contracts outside the village that brings in revenue. They do need to be addressed, and those could be increased accordingly as to share those costs if we stay with our own system. But there, of course, like I said, our infrastructure does need repairs, and we need to address that. That will not change. We have to make sure that gets taken care of. But I had another thought that wasn't necessarily addressed in the study. It was there's water quality concerns that in the study, there's water quality comparisons from Lake Erie to our reservoir. But some of the things that weren't in the study were things such as Lake Erie with the PFAS, the PFAs, PFOAs, and the PFAS. And then there's the other issue is the microplastics. A study done by Sherry Mason, Dr. Sherry Mason, right from our own university, found that the fairly, and she's continuing her studies through another university, is found that microplastics Lake Erie has some of the largest
amount of microplastics in the Great Lakes and possibly even in the world, as according to her article. And the microplastics, they find that they cannot 100% remove them. They become very, very degraded, and to the point where they are very harmful to humans. They can actually get into your blood system. There's also the PCBs and other issues. And there's also pharmaceuticals in Lake Erie. Now, these are things that we don't, like I said, I know we don't have microplastics in our reservoir. I know that we don't have pharmaceuticals in our reservoir because we don't have the water from municipalities' wastewater treatment plants. There's many of them around the Great Lakes that dump into Lake Erie, and sometimes there's overflows due to large rain, I&I issues. And those go into Lake Erie, so there's pharmaceuticals that go into there. All of these things have effect on humans. So I'm looking at this, a safer system. What is safer? Yes, there's things that are naturally occurring in our water. Some levels are higher than Lake Erie's, but they're naturally occurring. We don't actually, and from what I read, we don't go beyond, above the standards, state standards. And if there's some issues that we might need to address, I'm sure we can address them much more easily than what's in Lake Erie. I know that Dunkirk did a huge upgrade to their plant. They have a carbon filter. This activated carbon filter does a good job of getting up the PFAS. But there's a huge cost to carbon filters. And the more water you put through them, the more expensive they are to maintain. They have to be tested regularly, and they have to be changed every couple of years. And if they can be regenerated, reoxygenated at some time, those carbon filters, but then they have to completely replace. There's a huge replacement cost due to they have to be sent to a toxic waste site. And so those have to be dealt with. So when I'm looking at these studies, and I want to understand where is a safer place to get our water, I am inclined to think that a reservoir is a safer place.
I don't know if you had time to read the report that we were given by the Department of Health, but there was an email that all the trustees received from Natalie comparing the water, the treated water in Dunkirk and Fredonia. Natalie, would you like to quickly go over that?
What I did is I took the annual water quality reports that the city of Dunkirk and the village of Fredonia generated last year. And I can share this with the trustees. I did a side-by-side comparison of the two water systems and what contaminants are found. Essentially what you have to report every year is what contaminants are found, what you test for are found. And there is a stark difference between the two water systems. And I will say it is not that Fredonia's water is any safer or cleaner than Dunkirk's water. When it comes to things such as disinfection byproducts that are a consequence of disinfecting the water, in fact, Fredonia's water system is much higher. And when it comes to things like lead and copper, though Fredonia is actively treating to keep their lead and copper from absorbing into the water and being in the water that people drink, and Dunkirk is not doing that treatment, still Fredonia's results are much higher than what Dunkirk sees. So it behooves you to educate yourself. Go online, those water reports are available. They have to report everything that's detected. The health department has nothing to do with how those reports are generated. You simply review them and say, yes, everything that's there that has to be there is there, or no, it's not there. That is our only role. And I just want to add one other statement here, as long as I'm kind of on my soapbox. I commend Lobella, I commend the work that has been done by this group. However, there is one glaring thing in my mind that has not been addressed, and that is the volume of water that is available in the reservoir to treat. As was said earlier this evening, the reservoir had to be supplemented twice in the late 90s with water from Casadega Lakes. There's no guarantee that the federal or state government would allow that to happen again. And in 2007, the reservoir, about 60% of the volume of the reservoir was missing. There was only about 40% of the volume left. So it's not just a matter of doing the upgrades that are proposed. One of the significant deficiencies that is listed is the capacity of the reservoir. And there's nothing in these costs that address that.
That is why we already have, since that time, we made agreements with the city of Dunkirk and upgraded our Vineyard Drive pump station, and we've made agreements with the North County Water District as two separate intermissional agreements with the Route 20 connection. They aren't complete. They soon will be completed on the east and west of Fredonia. None of those had that capability at the time of that
And
drought.
none of those current connections have the capability to supply 100% of the village's water needs.
That's correct.
There are things that can be done to increase the capacity of the reservoir, but they are not included in these current costs.
All right,
Right.
is there any other comments from any other board members? I would like to thank the public for coming out tonight, for submitting questions, asking questions. This board needs to have all the information it can to make an educated decision based on your input and the engineering studies we have currently and previously to this. I want to thank the Opera House for allowing us to be here tonight to conduct this public hearing. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the representatives from LaBella, representatives from the county and the city of Dunkirk, and the board for taking the time to be here tonight to review everything and to take in all this information. Be assured that this board, along with myself, want to provide our village residents now and for many generations with safe, redundant, reliable drinking water. And we need to make some decisions. As was stated by one trustee right now, the rates would have to go up in order to not be losing money even if we did nothing at all. So if somebody's thinking that our water rates would not go up regardless, that's kind of not the situation currently. Our rates are going to go up with debt service, and no matter which direction we take here, your costs will have to go up. Our costs increase every year, so that's a reality along with everybody else's costs. At this point in time, if there's no other comments from the board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn this public hearing.
So moved.
I will entertain a second. It's been a motion and a second to adjourn. Trustee Linden.
Aye.
Trustee Twitchell.
Aye.
Trustee Byrd.
Aye.
Trustee Syracuse.
Aye.
Trustee Esperson.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you, everybody.